And we have a call from Andy. Andy?
Yes. Are you there?
Yes, go right ahead.
I'm 77 years old, and I used to know a man by the name of Ling. He was an engineer. He worked for Emerson Electric all during the 50s, and he would probably be about the same age, 77, maybe 80. And his family used to have a Chinese laundry on Academy between Del Mar and Enright. And I just wonder if the Leongs are still in St. Louis.
That's a good question. Did you run across that family?
Yeah, I have run into some relatives of the Liang family. And actually, Wen Liang probably was the brother of one of the informant I interviewed. Her name is Annie Liang. She is recorded in my book. I interviewed her, and she told me about her family's history and also the fascinating story of the old Chinatown in Harp Alley. Yes, did. Her family owned a restaurant, according to my interview of her. Her family owned a Chinese restaurant and a Chinese grocery store, and probably the Chinese laundry as well. Unfortunately, Andy Liang passed away a few years ago, but her brother, I think her two brothers, are still alive. And it's very interestingly, one of the Liang's family member, which is a daughter of one of the two Liang brothers. I'm not sure if it was Wen Liang. Okay, so one of these Liang brothers' daughter now is settled in Chicago. And I have an academic friend, who bought my book. She said, I have a friend who is from St. Louis. So she gave this book as a present to her. And then she realized, okay, this Annie Liang featured in the book is my aunt. So
small world.
Yeah, it's a small world. So it is something about this Liang family.
Del Mar, well, may I remind everyone, the phone number is 382-8255. That's 382-TALK. And the email is talk@kwmu.org. And yes, I have to say that, Andy, we're glad that we at least made a connection for you. But Del Mar, I remember as a child, always the treat was to go to the Chinese restaurant as a family. Somehow it had something for everyone. Yeah. And I think it still is. And I don't know whether that's stereotyping, but it's sure good food. And now that there is a development along Olive with so many different, really, I would say, top-flight restaurants to choose from, you have, I think, a business reason for creating a new Asian business community, Thomas.
Most definitely. If you look at east of 170, you'll see that there's a development that is coming up from the Asian community, and a lot of Chinese restaurants being developed and so forth. And you'll see a lot, like you said here, a very top-notch chef coming into some of the establishments in order for them to, show off some of their expertise, where we say. So pretty much they see that, and I guess they're migrating next to each other in hopes of that we will have the next Chinatown for the future, which is going to be over in Olivet.
Well, we have an expert who is silent but in the studio, and that's Walter Koh, who has been a great friend for that development and also for the Chinese American Forum and all these developments we're talking about. He mentions that there's Chinese breakfast at 5 of these restaurants. I do think it's interesting that along with the availability of the food has gone a lot of investment. And that's something I'd like to touch on because I really think it's a great strength of the Chinese American community, Huping, that they put their money where their interests are from the very beginning. And now it's really very important that they're aiding the development of an area that might have been slower to develop.
Yes, right. Yeah, I think the Chinese community, in the earlier time, they concentrated in laundry, restaurant, the grocery store in this business, So these stereotypes are no more. But we can still see there is some continuity there. For example, the restaurant industry. Well, the laundry has vanished. Okay.
Laundromats have taken care of that.
Yeah, but the restaurant has mushroomed since World War II, especially since 1977 when President Nixon visited China, which renewed Americans' general interest in Asia, particularly in China as well. So the Chinese restaurants, as a result, since 1970, has grown tremendously to satisfy both American mainstream American's need as well as the Asian community's need, because since 1965 there's an increasing number of new immigrants came to the United States from Asia. So the restaurant today, has been really the main important proportion of the Chinese business sector.
Thomas, it beyond the restaurants, in terms, I noticed in the book there was a lot of discussion about the Christian or the conversion or the going into churches, which also provided an education for many of the new families. Mm-hmm. Is there a diversity now in terms of where Chinese Americans are affiliated? In terms of the religion, in terms of in other words, because we're talking about how do we all get to know one another? Well, maybe we already do.
Right. Did you want to refer to you?
Oh, okay. Yeah. All right.
Okay.
The Chinese community, church is a very important, I call it a cultural infrastructure to facilitate this cultural community. And we have about a dozen Chinese churches in the St. Louis area. Maybe there are more recently. And there are some divides. You see that the different Christian denominations, and there are some Buddhist temples. And the Chinese go to those gatherings, the weekend, the congregations, to worship. But meanwhile, this church has also served as a very important community structure to help the members to communicate with each other, exchange information, and it is a very important element to stabilize the community.
Well, I understand there also is an interfaith group that talks about Taoism and Confucianism. Yeah. See, I think in addition to the new interest in good diet and eating Chinese food, because it's healthier, frankly, very often, I think you have an interest in learning more about all different kinds of, you say, go to China,
right,
and see about the ancient culture there, and which is, after all, the most ancient in many ways. So I would think that there would be an interest in sharing and doing some of these interfaith groups.
Right. Yeah, great. And of course, China is a wonderful place to go now. The fare to China usually is cheaper than you go to the other place. Right? But more conveniently, we have a very large community here in St. Louis. Just by going to the Chinese restaurants or visit the Chinese grocery stores, or maybe go to the Chinese language schools during the weekend. If it's convenient, you can really learn a lot of Chinese culture. Particularly, this China Day held every year during the May. Yeah, that's a great event to learn Chinese culture.
That's right, and I hope we'll talk a little more about that before we leave. But we have a call from Jim. Jim, what do you have?
Yes, Annie Leong was mentioned. We knew her from the time she was a very quiet, young waitress down at the Asia Cafe, very shy, who blossomed in 2 or 3 years into a wonderful, outgoing, ebullient person who loved everybody, and everybody loved her. She was the sort of person that any community should cultivate as a spokesperson. She was a doyen, I think, for the Chinese community for many, many years. Typically, she went to England on a press club tour, and inside of 5 minutes, she knew the name of the rather austere doorman at the British Hotel. She greeted people on the elevator from Sweden and startled them. She was the antithesis of the traditional inscrutable Oriental, past times. And any community who has people like that is furthered in its efforts to meld with the existing community. I knew a man of another type entirely, who was from one of the unfortunate ones who was rounded up in the Japanese collection during World War II, and he was given the job of finding a good place for the Japanese who obviously didn't want to go back to the West Coast. He helped pick St. Louis, and his name was Paul Maruyama, and he was a very dignified, not a bubbling Annie Leong type, but a man of great dignity, and you respected him. And again, he helped, I think, the Japanese gain acceptance.
Well, thanks very much. I can see that everyone has different memories, and